Resident Evil is one of the most infamous and cherished horror franchises of all time. From the first Resident Evil all the way to Village, this series has undergone massive development, and it's no joke when I say that this series is like no other. I'm Ethos, and I'll be going over possibly the most beloved Resident Evil game in its remade form. This is Resident Evil 4 Remake. The original Resident Evil 4 is one of the most influential horror games of all time, pioneering the third-person shooter aspect and bringing survival horror to a new standard. So, after 17 years, Capcom decided to remake it, like Resident Evil 2 and 3 before it. And I can say with full confidence, this is the best horror game I've ever played. And that might sound a bit overhyped to someone who hasn't played the remake, which is all the more reason to play it. So, let's break down this game and figure out why it's so good. The big theme in all of this, horror, is very unique in this game. There are really no sudden jump scares or loud noises that startle you. Instead, this game's sheer scale, enemy design, and survival bring a much needed tension to the game. Resident Evil 4 takes advantage of common phobias that people have. For example, insects and bugs, and utilizes that in its enemy design. A good example of this would be the enemies that transform after being killed, turning into an absolute monstrosity, creeping the player out because, well, look at it. The spider-like enemy is also a good example. It takes over a villager's mind and commands it to attack. Here's a quick demonstration of that.
Christ!
This scene terrified me, because I can tolerate chainsaw-wielding madmen, tyrants, and infected villagers. But that scene brought me back down to earth and reminded me that this is indeed a horror game. The weird thing about Resident Evil games is that, most often, the horror isn't needed for the game to be good. They could take out all the so-called scary moments and focus on shooting more, and it would be as good as it is with the horror. There was also one more part of the horror that's very interesting. In Resident Evil 4, we play as Leon, a special agent tasked by the President. Leon is heavily trained in CQB, martial arts, and shooting, so we are very capable of dealing with the threats that we face. But there's one section of Resident Evil 4 that we don't get to play as Leon. Instead, we play as Ashley, in a section of the game that we have no weapons in, only a lamp that freezes enemies. This entire sequence was absolutely terrifying because we are almost completely powerless. Ashley doesn't know how to fight. She's a terrified girl trying to escape, while we are hunted down by enemies from Dark Souls. The combat in Resident Evil 4 is really well done. I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel like John Wick while playing this game. And this is all coming from a person who plays basically nothing but tactical shooter simulators. Resident Evil 4 is also a game that doesn't hold your hand. It pushes you straight into action without even having a tutorial for shooting or anything else. And that's good. I'm sick of games pushing the same 30-minute tutorial onto players, regardless of their skill. The shooting mechanics in this game feel really good. The recoil is well managed, aiming is smooth, boss fights feel good, and in my opinion, the best thing about the combat, parrying. Oh my god, I love parrying. It is so much fun. This is genuinely one of the first games that I've intentionally ditched my firearms and took out my knife to fight enemies. It's just so smooth, so effective, and the knife combat is so fun. So many games get CQB completely wrong, but just this one feature of letting the player take out enemies with their knife effectively made me literally giggle in excitement. Enemy behavior is also an important thing to know here because this game gives you so many options to choose from when fighting. You can melee, shoot, and even try to maneuver around the enemies and backstab them. As well as this, the stealth is done very well, with the movement being complemented by the atmosphere of the game, giving you, the player, a feeling of power but also anxiety, as your enemy could turn around at any moment. This game's combat is exceptional. The atmosphere in Resident Evil 4 is very surreal, with the game taking place in a Spanish village, which to the normal person is quite irrelevant, then making it stand out by infecting its citizens with a virus that turns them into zombies. The aesthetic complements this very well, giving an almost sick feeling to the place. Same thing with all locations in this game. It feels like a place that was well maintained before, but now is infected by an unstoppable force. The lake is a good example of this, feeling more like a swamp than a lake. The castles feel grand, but also corrupt in a strange way, with broken bits of wall and floor everywhere, showing how it used to be maintained, but now under the control of someone who simply doesn't care. This place feels tragic, indoctrinated, and brainwashed beyond recovery. Resident Evil 4 feels very ghostly, as if you were being stalked at all times. You can just tell how many people have died here just by walking around. The castle feels almost surreal and mythical, like something straight out of a magic fantasy book or something. The candlelit night, the torch-filled alleyways, the ghostly caves and mythical castles all combine into one strange being, the virus. History and tragedy are waiting around every corner. The past memories and memorabilia of the families that lived there now roaming around, lusting and desiring to kill. The characters of Resident Evil 4 complement each other perfectly. Leon, a special agent, accompanied by Ashley, the complete opposite, a scared and confused girl. Their relationship continues to develop from the start of the game, going from Ashley not trusting him to looking at him in search of guidance. Ashley and Leon are who you're going to spend the most time around, with Luis Serra, a former researcher for Umbrella, acting as comedic relief and later down the line, a friend. Almost like a comrade. No, ditch that. Luis is our comrade, our brother in arms. There's no other soldiers here on our side, no one to rely on, but Luis. And the merchant, goddamn he's cool. The small cast of allies that we have enhance the game rather than making it worse. We get to focus on only these people and their dynamics, getting familiar with them over time. There's nobody to depend on in this ghostly and horrifying place, besides a few good friends. The villains are written fantastically, contrasting each other in their own way. Ramon, a so-called civilized, classy, smug, and incredibly evil 4'2" asshole. A man who infected his own village with a virus, turning them into monsters. Then we have Major Krauser, someone who trained Leon to become what he is today. Corrupted and broken by ambitions of power. He shares a similar view on life as Albert Wesker, along the lines of, the only thing that can defeat power is more power. That is the one constant in this universe. However, there is no point in power if it consumes itself. I will enlist the help of an old friend against our common foe. I will use one pawn to eliminate the other, and emerge with the spoils for myself. But Krauser had a more basic and raw view of this, believing in just one thing, power and more power. This character is almost tragic because he was corrupted and broken. And the last villain to cover, Sadler, a priest/leader of Los Iluminados, the people who are corrupted and taken over by the virus. There's not much to talk about him, besides that he is just incredibly evil. Oh, and one more character, Ada. Okay, hear me out. The voice acting wasn't that bad. She literally had like 20 minutes of screen time in a game that's about 15 hours long. I didn't really care about it. Ada's character is interesting because she clearly cares for Leon, saving him once and helping him along the way. But she's still too focused on her mission of trying to get the virus for her employer, Albert Wesker. At the end, she does redeem herself by pulling an Uno reverse card on Albert Wesker, taking the virus for herself instead of giving it to him. With all this said, Resident Evil 4 Remake is a fantastic game, with fast-paced and immersive combat and stealth, chilling and slow horror, an atmosphere that is very hard to achieve, and characters that you won't forget easily. If I've convinced you, go play the game yourself if you haven't. And until the next time, hasta la muerte, mi amigo.
You guys are really starting to become a giant pain in my ass.